welcome, and we're glad you've chosen to join us. Your time is valuable. So we've thought out how to have a conversation without actually having the outcome predetermined. It's an emerging community that we're inviting you into that takes the opportunity of a conversation to both be stimulated to a new insight, but then to build that into how a community can hold it, embody it, and take it out into the world. So listen in and be part.
Hey, Barry. So we're live now. We're in the BD Labs Facebook group. And I wanted this to kind of be the start of a new weekly series we'll do Fridays at 3:30. And starting with me, it'll just kind of be like open, unstructured Q&A. And me and you, we've done a lot of talks like this. But this should be a softball to get started. And then as time goes on, we'll invite other people from the community to come in and bring questions and kind of spur discussion with everybody.
Love it. When you say Friday at 3:30, you take me back, because high school finished at 3:15, and by 3:30 I had gone to my locker, thrown my stuff in, and school was behind me and the weekend was in front of me. And I learned some things inside the walls, but I always desired to get beyond them. And the weekend, 3:30 at Friday, was like a time when my head began to change, because I knew I had unplanned freedom in front of me. And I loved it. So I like this weekly rhythm of Fridays at 3:30. You picked it. It's fun to think about it from how it's been in my life before. Let's get out and play.
Right? Yeah, exactly. There's definitely an energy to a school's out. Yeah. School's out for the weekend. So I love it. Yeah, and exactly. Let's get out and play. I think that's the right kind of attitude for this thing. I thought a lot about what would be to our group and community here on the BD Labs Facebook group, like what would be of value. And I realized, like, rather than trying to like come up with something super strategic or intentional, I think just kind of the reality of opening up, the way this type of work is done, and really just getting a window into that, to kind of a normal conversation between you and I, and how those kinds of conversations are the beginning of this leadership journey that helps us develop into better leaders, and I think maybe people on a more fulfilled, more satisfied path. Maybe that, I don't know. And actually, maybe that's the first place to get there. Like, what do you think is there for developing in leadership? Like, is that like just for a corporate CEO, or and what, or is it for anybody? Is it for somebody who doesn't have a team or doesn't run a team, and what do you see as like kind of the benefit of doing the work and developing in your leadership?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. It gets my mind rolling, so I appreciate it. And I think leadership almost has become a role, if not a title. And what's to be critiqued about that? Well, I think so many times we lose the person. And a well-rounded person ends up being looked to for leadership in a number of circumstances and situations throughout their life. So when you deal with the person and not the role, it seems like the role presents itself in meaningful and valuable ways going forward. But leaders who are seeing it as a role or a title, and not really their life and not their own personhood being changed and worked on, and those leaders end up getting into roles and they realize they've left themselves with a role. And in time, the role assumes their personality. They don't even know who they are outside of the role. I mean, literally, when they retire, they go through grief because they so interface their personhood to their role, they don't know who they are. And that grief, if you really play it out, was a delayed sense that they had a long time ago, knowing that they were doing the role really well, but personally they weren't satisfied. Personally, they were divorced of the meaning they thought this life could present for them. And so they worked harder at becoming a leader or going to leadership classes, but the curriculum, the content, the path wasn't there. It was time management. It was 7 highly effective habits. It was impersonating other leaders. It wasn't their life. It wasn't the truth of their own being. And that's the only kind of leader you can be, is the one that you are from the inside out. And the tools to find that seem to be missing. And so we've compensated leaders fine to not ask the questions of meaning, just do the performance. Here's the package, here's the salary, here's the profile. And that's not all bad. I don't want to sound negative. I just want to say that I can hear the complaint of how people can do all of that and then feel like their life had big parts unlived, or at least unmet, because the role itself isn't big enough. So I'll pause there, because I think that's what we're trying to do, is to make a contrast as to why this work is meaningful for anyone, whether they're a parent, a teacher, a CEO, the captain of their team, or this is the perspective of what does it mean to take your life into the transformation.
I notice, like, with young people, I've got nephews like just entering their 20s, and I see them really looking for like opportunities for leadership, and trying to like feeling like they're kind of like, I think I'm supposed to be an adult now, right? I think I'm supposed to be stepping into some form of leadership. And obviously I happen to have nephews, but it's young women of the same age too. And then there's, like, you've talked to me before about like a later stage where you've kind of achieved a lot, and now it's a matter of like distributing that over other people, and then you enter like this later stage of the sage, right? And I'm wondering, like, is leadership just a young man's game, right? I mean, obviously these my nephews and the nieces of the world who are just stepping into their 20s, there's kind of like a critical juncture for them to develop leadership. But what about the men who are like just entering the stage, or men and women who are just entering the like sage part of their life? Like, are they developing leadership too, or is that like, is there a different transition happening there? And that's something.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if I've got that answer. I think it's a great question. My sense is that you need to be the leader for the season of life you're in. We complicate 20-year-olds by trying to make them 68-year-old leaders in what they know, or the capabilities, the capacity. It's not fair to them. I think in every season of your life, leadership is contextualized by your level of energy, the peers that you have access to, the opportunities should be growing in size. I don't envy a 20-year-old who's the CEO of a fast-growing, scaling company. It's out of proportion too often. It's not fair to him or her. And there's exceptions, and we love to talk about the exceptions of a unicorn. But I think for the most part, leading from the season or the context where life has you is where you're going to learn the most. And then that will journey with you through the next open door into the next season. And opportunities, if they're done well, stagger themselves one on another, developing the same person, but through a different series of opportunities that grow. So there's leadership all the way down in the beginnings of our life. Does that get to the point? Does that get around the question?
I mean, totally to that point. Obviously, as you're talking, I'm thinking Adam Neumann from WeWork, right? So he was a young guy and just like thrust at the very front of something that maybe was a little bit more than he was ready for. But also just in our own personal work, I have dear personal friends in the work that we do, that we've come across, who are these 20-something leaders who it's just like, man, we, especially in Silicon Valley, we kind of glorify this idea of being like the 20-something-year-old CEO of a big company, and sometimes, like, my friends who have achieved that are not real happy.
Yeah.
So when you say it's not fair to them, like I was really thinking of the personal cases that I know about that was like, it was a lot of pressure for someone who didn't know themselves a whole lot yet.
Right.
Which obviously, like, that's a generalization. That's not every 20-something-year-old, but is a lot of 20-something-year-olds, right? I mean, that's just kind of like,
yeah, it's all set. It's all set. It's set up that way sometimes where it's really not good for the person. And by that, I mean, right now, the economy is so looking for the new idea and the young idea that they'll take a very charismatic young person that has a great idea, or they have a great charismatic gift. And by that alone, they'll leverage them up to the top of something that they're not prepared to lead. They're charismatic. That doesn't mean they have the character, or they've got a great idea for the market, but that doesn't mean they have the inner fortitude or the resiliency that it's going to take to bring that to the market. But we don't ask that of leaders. We simply want their charisma, or we simply want their ideas, because we're hungry to make a celebrity inside the economy, because that sells. So it's almost the younger, the better. It's almost the more undeveloped, the more there could be a real diamond in the rough. And it's not fair to the leader because that he or she is yet to be formed. So, I mean, we really see it in kids where, I mean, the obvious example is if you're in third grade, but you have a growth spurt, so you look like a fifth grader. By physique, you fit in with the fifth graders, but in the emotional development, you're in third grade. So you go to a restaurant and somebody expects you to act like you're in fifth grade because you look big, but the fact is that's not really who you are. And I think it's something of that kind of a situation that we're looking for people that we can actually act like they've got a lot more on the ball or make something out of them when we really haven't seen them take the path to really develop who they are, so they can hold it and sustain it and actually become it when the external forces start really pushing in. And charismata, or just simply having a great idea, isn't going to answer what some of the situations are going to be demanding. And seriously, at that point, that's just carnage. Those are just more kind of tried experiments. It's like fail fast, and after a while, those are just strewn bodies on the shore of Silicon Valley or innovation land of people that were gifted but never developed. So if that makes sense, and it just bothers me because these really are gifted people. They deserve the right to have a personal interior developed to start to match something of their own giftedness, but it's going to take them a while.
I mean, now I'm thinking, what's her name? Elizabeth Holmes? Is that her name?
Remember came out with great, yeah.
So, I mean,
very
totally,
charismatic.
I really felt the idea of this, like the missed opportunity of truly gifted people who are left undeveloped. And almost in some situations, like take that moment is taken advantage of, right? That they can be used as this propped up as this symbol that helps tell a story and whatever, but it's really at their detriment, like cost to them, at cost to their own development into who it is that they're trying to be. And that's why I'm grateful that I met someone like you.
Thank you, Damien.
And you've been with me, kind of working with me on my journey for a long time now. You've definitely seen some development over the years. And I still, I see a ton of growth from where I was when we first started talking. And I still see a lot of development of where I want to go. And I still want to be a better leader. And so, what's in there, right? And so, obviously my leadership kind of profile has changed a lot from like running a company where I had a team and I needed some leadership skills fast, to like now, it's more, my leadership ends up being a lot more like with clients, or just with my friend group, with my family needs my leadership sometimes. Definitely in relationships, working on showing leadership. That's definitely one of the things that has blown my mind that you've taught me. That
say that part again.
Showing up in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I watch Coach Carter or movies like that, right? And I get the idea when I'm leading a team, how important it is to show up as the inspirational leader, right? And I never really thought, kind of embarrassing as it is to admit, I never really thought maybe I should show up as that leader in my relationship. And
that's a good point.
Well, something I'm still working on, right?
Well, it goes back to what you were saying in our earlier question. The leader isn't somebody in one area that they're not in another area. I mean, when leadership's a title and a role, and it's what you do at work, and then when you come home, you're different? No, those are different roles. You're the same person. So we develop the person, and then we send the person into the different ways that they show up with that development and offer it to a team or to a spouse or to kids or to whatever their situation in life is. Yeah, and that's just so important because we compartmentalized in the West the different facets of our life as if to think we are different selves. We have different roles, but we take the same body everywhere we go. We take the same spirit, we take the same mind with us all day long. And that we've learned to turn parts of ourselves off or on in order to be effective somewhere is not all bad, but it's certainly not helpful. And I've watched that out of really good leaders. Their home life can be a wreck, and they can be really powerful in the boardroom. And that's not to their success. They don't get alone and say, "Isn't that great how I've done that?" They are sometimes a great mystery to themselves, while on another side of themselves, they see themselves very empowered or successful. And that doesn't help to integrate them. That actually bothers them. And again, that's because they've not treated and seen life as a person. They've more or less find out how to use their gifts and accommodate certain roles and expectations. Right? That's a mouthful. And there's all kinds of coaching, therapy, self-discovery, spirituality, all mixed into that kind of a statement. But you can begin to see the compartments don't help us.
I mean, but that's the thing. That's kind of what has been really powerful in my life on this journey, right? Is that you help me understand the coaching, spirituality, psychology, all of it ends up being one, right? Because the person I'm showing up to as at work is it is all those things. And I personally thought I had things really well compartmentalized, right? Until something falls apart at home, and then all of a sudden work is real tough, right?
Sure.
To see oh, actually this isn't as compartmentalized as I thought it was.
That's right. Compartments work until the doors get left open on one. You come home from work really, really conflicted, and then the next room you walk into, maybe from work to home, gets the energy. The door stays open from work, and you bring home that negative energy of how you were handled in work, and then you display it in the other room and blow up, or you get distant, or you're passive, or you're overly. And somebody says, "What's wrong?" And what they're doing is they're trying to talk to you about the room you just left. And most people we are talking to are coming from a conversation they're still having with themselves from another room. And they don't know how to integrate. Even COVID, like quickly, our offices now are just a doorway and step away from the rest of our lives because they're in our home, and there's no commute space. There's no time to leave one room, collect it, get ready, because the next room. So this is very much an example of the interior of a lot of our lives as leaders. We try to compartmentalize it, but in fact, it's far more interactive. And the conversation sometimes we're having with ourselves in one room, we carry to the next room. And we think we can handle it, but the people that are in that new room realize we're not really present to them. They actually know some more about us than we sometimes are aware of ourselves.
Man, that really got me, the idea that, like, everybody is coming into the room from a conversation they just had, right?
And still
like,
going on, still unfinished.
still
Absolutely.
and it really makes you think, like, how much that, a meeting goes well or doesn't go well, and how much that has to do with the conversation that they're
That's
just,
right.
Especially, I mean, a lot of like leadership positions, talking about like more technical again, like in companies, you're probably going from meeting to meeting, and just how much that colors the way what happened in one might color the way you're showing up in another.
Definitely very little time sometimes to, and it's the way we play the game. Some of us actually complain about it, but it's how we actually even choose to structure it, because we feel exposed and vulnerable to actually sit down with ourselves after a meeting and close up that conversation. We almost stay busy to stay distracted from having to say, hey, hang on now. And so leaders are paid to stay busy and fill up their schedule. And in fact, it gets to be blurry. So even taken to like a conversation that's been tough and it's not finished, but the meeting's over and you've got to go to the next one. And so that's emotionally and mentally, that earlier conversation is still very alive in you. Okay, we get that. It's like, whoa, that's not fair. It's not fair to the people that are receiving you. It's not fair to you. But play inside of like a perfectionistic mindset. So no matter what room I'm in, my perfectionistic mindset is there with me. And that pretty much is a voice that sometimes we take, and there's different ones of just being a perfectionist. I happen to be a recovering perfectionist. That's why I'm bringing it up. But that's a conversation I'm having with myself before I even start with somebody who's going to give me some conflict or some challenge or a problem we've got to fix. So until I address some of these other conversations I'm in and show up for them, I'm simply almost using some of my other work to stay distracted or to try to outsource to my work some of the things that I've got to deal with internally.
I can definitely.
Leaders get so busy and they get more and more separated from the work they really need to do. And then they're blasting out in power structures what everyone else needs to do. And as long as quotas are being met and people are being hired, right, and driven, you can get away with it. Externally, internally, the gap is beginning to grow.
Right.
Right.
I think, some people are just really good at managing that gap, and so they get farther. But I mean, eventually, the debt comes to call for everybody, right?
How to end leadership joyfully, how to come to the sage season of your leadership with satisfaction and joy is a real missing art in Western economy.
Man, that's huge.
Yeah, because they already tell you the way they had to do it was wearing them out, burning them out, smiling less, having less fun, getting more life squeezed out of them. Yeah, and it's like, really? So work actually has that kind of end game for you?
As you say that, I realize, like, I think a lot of my generation actually shies away from leadership and certainly like formal.
They don't see it being part of the happy path.
Yeah, exactly. Because as you say that, it's like, I don't want to end up. That doesn't sound good to me. Like eking my way through, like barely making it to retirement, and then really it's like, well, I don't know. Like, what if I'm not successful enough to have a nice retirement? I feel like I'm leveraging, my present for the future that is uncertain. Right?
Yeah, so, that's really good, Damien. The young person's asking, what good is being a leader? Or why why leadership? As it's been played out so many times by the generation ahead of them. Yeah, I mean, and it's a fair question. And I think you tell me, it seems like what I'm hearing most from the younger generation is because the global problems are so grand that it's requiring us to step up.
Totally. I was having this conversation yesterday, right? And I think Gandhi was trying to let us know, right? Like, be the change. And I think it's really kind of like be the leader you want to see in the world, right? To like steal his quote. There's something to that, in that the nature of the world and the way it's shifting is really calling like this top down, like Damien's going to be the leader and I'm going to carry everybody through until I'm completely exhausted, and hopefully I've managed to like squirrel away some, some sweet retirement. I don't think that model works anymore. I don't think that connects. I don't think that path works for the future that we're honestly already in, but certainly not the one that we're walking into. And so it's all part of this conversation that we've been having, that I don't know if it's the changes in people inform changes of technology, or changes in technology inform changes in people, or
probably both. And I think there's got to be an effect that each of them are having on the other, right?
Like if you're looking at innovation of a company, or innovation of products or processes, like you have to be looking at innovation of people too.
Yeah.
Like the way people are relating to each other is completely changing. And there's technological ways, right? Like we're having this conversation via Zoom, but there's like just relational ways that like, the way we look at leaders isn't necessarily like be the guy like we've been talking about, right? Be the guy with all the answers. Now it's much more, be the person to my right that like we can be having like this exchange of ideas. And you know what, honestly, what it makes me think of is when I was married before, my grandmother, I asked her, like, Grandma, what is the secret to like a healthy marriage? And she said, Damien, you have to remember that there can only be one captain of a ship. And I took that at my 20-year-old self to mean like take charge, right? Like I got to be the one in charge. And as it turned out, my ex-wife did not appreciate that very much. I don't think that's what my grandmother meant. But with that, like, there's certainly only one at any given time.
Well, yeah, you take the awareness you have, and you lead with it. And if it's a little bit, then that's what you've got. If it's more, then that's what you've got. But you inflict your own awareness on those that you're trying to lead and serve, and they bear witness either to your crash and defeat or to your change and transformation, like Gandhi was saying. I think communities develop their own leaders. That means there's a relational locality in which Damien found himself early on, even before school years, in which in that social dynamic, there's a you getting formed, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if your awareness is then pretty much captivated by, like for me, my dad passed away when I was young, so I'm 8.5. So my awareness, my social context is, I better step up and be the man of the house, because I was the only son left. And so because that was where I was at in my life, that was the captain of the ship I became. And I sailed under that title for as long as I could stay on that voyage, meaning that it wasn't all bad, but there came a point in time when I had to resign from that role if I was going to grow my life on. So those would just be my captain years. They weren't necessarily wrong. It's what life was asking me to do, and a set of traits became mine. But there was something more to my story and my being than being captain of the ship or son without a father.
Right.
It could take me. I mean, right? So I had to heal and let go of some of that time in order to grow into, well, what's the next assignment? And life has a way, and communities have a way of handling crises or opportunities and looking to their own membership to call out one of us to say, rise up, rise up. Is that making enough sense? Because I think people that are trying to lead, they don't lead out of their narrative. They lead out of some aspirational strength finder test they took. And I'm like, well, I love that you have strengths, but tell me your story. because in the story is the formation. You can take a strength finder's question, find out that you have high leadership traits, but if your identity of being a leader is captain of the ship, you use all those traits in order to overpower people. It's like, well, that's not a holistic understanding of what a leader does. What she or he does isn't just I shouldn't say inflict, they don't just bring their strengths to a group of other people and say, I'm now the captain of your ship. So, well, then what do you do? Like, well, and it's like, we go back and we find out, where is leadership in your story? And in what seasons of life did you acquire what tools? And then where did you let some things go so you no longer are the captain of the ship in your 40s? Because that's not very cute. You know, it's when you're little, you can get away with it, but it didn't work in your own marriage, right? And it did things that I was doing very well in junior high. They just don't work well at all in my 20s. And so if you're going to be a leader, that's why we're saying the seasons of leadership begin to change. And there's an arc and a narrative to our story that we kind of are living in. And I think communities form a lot of leaders as they see what they need, or they watch in your life what you had to go through, and they name you as such. Like they call that out of you. That's your real story, rather than this independent study of what are your strengths and then what might you have a higher capability on, and you should be paid and hired for that and promoted as such.
Right.
Am I saying it clear enough that you can see the contrast?
Completely. What it brings up for me is two questions really. Like, so you'd said something along the lines of, you had to let go your chapter of like being the captain of the ship. And then the next step is, once you let go of that, then you gotta you're left with, who am I now?
That's right.
And I, kind of having walked that with you, I recognized even in letting it go, you're left with kind of a clarity of yourself, but you can't, it's hard to name it. It is. It's hard to say like, oh, I'm the leader that does this,
Right.
It's just,
Right.
I don't know. So I guess it's like the first thing is, how do you let go of that, like, whatever it is, I think of Jacob Marley, right, in A Christmas Carol, dragging his chains around. I feel like that's kind of where I was. Like I was this big, strong leader dragging all these chains of my past that had like turned me into the leader that I was. And I felt like I had to carry all that past with me. So like, A, how do you let go of that? You've been through it, you've watched me do it. And so I'm interested in that. And then B is like, how do you define yourself coming out of that? Like, how do you figure out like, oh, this is who I am then?
Those are great questions. And almost depending on the person that's asking them, you begin to look down into their story, because maybe the tools are the tools for everybody, but how we use them and which one we start with is kind of customized for the person asking the question. I think a lot of leaders, if they tell the truth, will tell you that early on there's a deficiency, something that was needed, that was either taken from them or was missing in people who they loved, and they had to step up into that. And so there's an arrangement of willpower to overcome life's tragedies. I think that that's really important, because leaders so many times want to bury that part of their story and just go to success or go to scale. But early on, they learned how to work when there wasn't something, and they borrowed the power of that moment to become stronger themselves, and they willpowered up. They learned to make internal agreements that came from poverty, but it didn't matter, because they weren't going to let that stop them. And then they get somewhere like having this agreement with a willpower that really lets them drive to higher performance. And then something about that has to like crystallize into almost a second half of life where it's no longer about being driven by willpower. And we can talk about what that dynamic is, but I've watched individuals overcome in their own story great odds, and then they're recognized with that, and they feel stronger, and they're able to willpower themselves. But then that's the next room they have to let go of if they're going to go on into the areas of being a more holistic leader. So I'll pause right there, because I think that's, again, part of how do you get that out of a person's story.
Yeah.
Find out what it is that they had to show up for, and they mounted strength because they encountered it. And then how did they take that strength and not even get stymied there, but learn to let some of that story go so even more development can go forward. But the first one, I think, is working with your own will against things that would, separate the weak from the strong, so to speak.
Yeah, I really hear you saying that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. There's a platform of kind of an approach to solving that, but how that platform goes into each person's life is going to be really different depending on their own individual story. So you can't separate out development of somebody's leadership away from the room that they're coming in from, right? Like that almost comes full circle. Like
good point.
It's you can't separate it from their story,
right?
Which of course I can see that in my life. It reminds me, there's a really great book called Taming Your Outer Child. And it's the idea is that the inner child is the 5-year-old you with an unmet need, right? And then the outer child forms in response to the unmet need, right? So there was, before there was the Barry that was going to step up and be the man of the house. There was the Barry that was crying out for a dad and was looking for who's gonna teach me to play ball, right?
Right.
And so in response to recognizing that that's not happening, that need is not going to be met, an outer child is formed that then kind of lives in our strengths.
True.
And that's kind of just different language for exactly what you were just saying. And then so taming the outer child is kind of like the moving from letting the outer child drive the bus and the transition into adulthood, where you can see the outer child and honor the part of you that wants to be too tough for anybody or whatever, right? Defense mechanism that developed, but be able to set that down and say, oh yeah, no, I see why we want to react that way.
That's right.
And that's just not how we deal with things anymore.
That's really good, because you're taking that into a helpful place for me. So I think you meet something in your early life that's given to you that you have to deal with, and by dealing with that tragedy or that loss, you develop a strength and a relationship to your own will. And right on. And then you now parlay it to actually being a strength. But then you come up against never having healed what you have now put a shell around. Right. So the shell around is, hey, I know how to power through. I can outwork anybody because, hey, you know what? Because, the neighborhood I grew up in, that's what I do. Right. So the whole culture of that person's company and or parenting and all the other rooms, that's what they do two things. They bring that into those rooms, and many times they don't work well in that room because that room is a different context looking for a different side of their own life. Secondly, they put people that they have very close to them on their team, and their team has that rule. So their kids, if they have kids, or their close friends, if they have a ring of friends, or if they partner or a spouse, all of a sudden there's a disconnect, because what they don't know how to tell those people that they're closest to is, in fact, this is what you need to be, because this is what I do to get through my life. And if you want to know me, this is how I do me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden somebody goes, I'm not connecting with you. And they're saying, what? I'm bringing the thing that always works so well.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, if you're a boss, you can fire people. That's why that room's so tricky. You can use your power and never have to look at your own awareness. And as long as you're successful, you can just keep going through people.
Yeah.
For a while. I'm still saying at the end of the game, you're not a joyful leader, but I get it. But in the other arrangements where you don't have the ability to hire and fire, like other close friendships, you wonder why you're missing intimacy. And what you don't realize is you caused a team culture that everybody really works hard and earns what they make. And people aren't going to get close to you for that. But in fact, that's what's been good up to this point. And now you're, like you said, your game gets a little more questioned. So you get defensive because the outer child, or the shell you put around that, is starting to realize it's not able to hold off the questions because there's some interior work that has to be done. And everybody's life has this. This is not like an exceptional person we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I think.
And leaders do that. And leaders do that work, right? That's where empathy, that's where the understanding of why be vulnerable. That's why emotional intelligence, self-awareness is becoming such the menu of the day for leaders, is because, yeah, we can go into it, but it's because that is what people are looking for out of a holistic leader, is not just their strength, but if they have an understanding as to how to work with other people.
So if as a young entrepreneur, or a young leader of some kind, it's clear for me in terms of like, and probably because I live it personally, right? But
yeah, well, all of us, right? Go ahead, keep going.
It's important to do the work early.
Yeah.
Because if you're off by a millimeter at the start, right, you're off by a mile down the road. And so it's super valuable to do this work. I mean, I wish I would have, started this at 20, and maybe a little even earlier than that. If I was going to get married at 20, maybe I should have started this work a little earlier. But so I can see that. What do you say to leaders that are like more seasoned, and maybe they're either not quite in the kind of sage season of their life, or they're approaching that? I
like that. I like that question.
That I'm trying to get to. That's like, there's a relationship to innovation, and like, finding a better way to doing things and adapting a company and a team to the way the world is working. And I think there's a lot of talk about technology and how to do that. And there's just like, there's not a lot of talk about people. And how are we making sure people are ready for that? People are largely just going to listen to, they're going to be impacted by how the leader is choosing to do that. And most of those leaders, like, if we're real, they're older guys, right? Somewhere in between me and you. And, with more kind of life behind them. And so if they think their work is done, right? Oh, that's for those young entrepreneurs. Good for you. Figure out your leadership. And I don't know, I don't know. I don't really think that's the case, but I'm trying to deferring to your expertise here.
All right. So the one thing I pulled out, I kept in front of me, you just tapped on. So it's a poem by Hafez, a Sufi poet. Okay. That's brief, but it says, the small man. He wrote a long time ago, so forgive the masculine pronoun, but the small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners. I'm going to read it again.
Yeah.
The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful, rowdy prisoners.
So I'm going to give you my interpretation here.
Please.
I think kind of the way business used to run and needed to run was command and control.
Small cages.
Right. And we're really learning now that just is not going to work, especially just in the nature of the way everything is doing. Those systems aren't going to work anymore. And so now it's leadership looks a lot more like dropping keys
to the rowdy, beautiful, rowdy prisoners. See, the sage sees the people in the cages as necessarily rowdy. It's good. There's energy and beautiful. They're not prisoners because they're bad. They're prisoners because they're in organizational structures that no one can grow in. They're compartmentalized.
Wow.
They're not being treated as whole persons and developed, and if you will, loved as such. So the sage has to come along when the moon is low, ducking his head in order to drop keys so that the rowdy, beautiful prisoners can begin to realize these cages are not fit for who we are. Now, grandparents and others could fit those cages because in their day, a cage was a new cool thing. A CEO, an organizational hierarchy, a top-down command, knowing exactly what floor I'm on, that could really be working for them. But for us, the environment of innovation is not asking us to stay inside those old cages. So where are the sages that are actually helping us dropping the keys and sages are people that see people in cages in their true sense of worth, in their true sense of self, right? In the story that you've been living through. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you came through. It's like, how'd you come through it? It's like, tell me your whole story, because coming out of that cage, coming out of those early years, or coming out of the protection of that one inner child is like, come on. And the sage calls people out into the work of their life. It's a beautiful poem.
It is a beautiful poem. And it was, especially your interpretation of it, like, it just blew my mind. I'm thankful to still get my mind blown after 5
back at you
working together on this stuff. But I hear you saying that industry has really kind of matured beyond that way of thinking. And man, that's a powerful thought. And I immediately went to, like, it's scary to think about, like, what's the ROI on kind of dropping keys instead of maintaining control and predictability, right? But it's like, I mean, man, can you imagine just like we were talking about earlier, the missed opportunity of undeveloped people, right? And it comes back to the same thing again. Like, can you imagine the squandered potential, the profitability and productivity of, like, trying to manage these people who are horribly unhappy, trying to just, like, project manage them into getting their stuff done, and you got to hire project managers for your project managers to, like, get them to get their stuff done. And I mean, we've been in enough of these corporate rooms where you see it, and it's like, the barriers to innovation a lot of times have a lot to do with just that layer and layer of bureaucracy. And what I'm hearing you say is, like, at the bottom of that problem is really, like, you're talking about undeveloped people.
That's right. You can develop people, or you can build cages. Okay, you can develop people, or you can build cages. And what we've come from in modernity is building the most effective cages that human beings can be skilled to occupy. And that page now is turned. And so the new technology isn't smarter, faster, more efficient cages. It's human development for the person, so that the new keys aren't a faster laptop. It's a sage in your life that sees in you the rowdy, beautiful prisoner, and helps you prepare your life so that you begin to move out and forward. And most companies have the ability to build cages, but they are slipping on how to build leaders. How do you then release someone from their cage and give them permission to outgrow it? And do we have sages around that can drop keys? There are some inside companies. You can spot them. But again, you spot a sage because of what the sage sees in others. The sage doesn't walk around talking about themselves and what they've accomplished. The sage basically is a person who begins to see others for the beauty, rowdiness that's within them. And I would just note that, because I think corporations need to figure out the job description of sages and bring them in where the cages are, and let the revolution begin of how do we grow people so that they can in fact be released into the work of their life for the benefit of production. I mean, I think that they'll get more done in a cage-free environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the sages can be missing. I think the cages don't produce humans very effectively. And we spend 60 to 70 hours a week in a cage. We give most of our lives to entering one of these kind of places, believing that the contract we've signed is if we do the cage well, it'll give us back what we want in our lives. And like you said, the generation you're part of understands that that's not been made good on.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the alternative? And I think it's this inner path of how leaders are starting to get formed. I might say from the inside out, or in an awareness. And I think the sage has to awaken people past their title of just, I'm in this cage, I'm VP of this. It's on the door. It's the key. It fits this door. This is what I do. And causing another conversation where the rowdiness that's been inside of us for a long time gets a chance to get expressed. And we start to mobilize that person into some skills that are far more productive for the whole life. So it's a little esoteric, but I believe that's the path, and maybe the difference between just getting assigned a cage and being given a key, and there's no sage that's ever around to see in you something more.
What I love about that is it brings me to one of my all-time favorite quotes from my sister, and she said, she was dealing with like a particularly difficult boss, actually. I think this works looking down or going up.
Or going up.
And she said, I was like, man, how do you do it? Right. And she said, you just treat people as the leader they're capable of being.
Mm-hmm. There you go. See, Damien, we've been doing this for 4 years. Like a guy I deeply love and walk with, David Roberts, pointed you out to me across the room, and you didn't know you were being pointed out. And he said, among all these people, he said, that guy over there pointing at you, he's worth your time. So I went over a little bit later, maybe even walked me over. I was introduced, and that was our beginning. I don't think we had another conversation for the year. Right? But I never forgot that a person with some sage-like eyes, meaning David, pointed out that young guy sitting over there, which was you. So why am I going there? You didn't see it in yourself.
Right.
Yeah. And how could you? But someone in your life that could see it in you became the first step of that formation. That you, in fact, were having a little bit of a rowdiness inside, but where's it safe to talk about that? Or, we just put performance on that. You don't have to deal with that stuff. Just perform better, outsource it, get a good title. It'll go away. Whatever it is that we say to ourselves, really, the sage has an ability to look inside to the person, like Celine, your sister, and say, I think I see something in you that you might not be seeing in yourself. Now, that's really scary stuff, because that's a way to awaken any ego of a person. And of course, they'll follow you. You can sell them books and tapes and
right
for a little while. But what's crazy is it's actually true about each person. It's just, do we have the path and the skill and, if you will, the old wise ways of developing who that image really is in that person, to where they can come to see it. And I think one of the first things you and I did was this, I might call it in more clinical words, this mirror neurons. When I look at you, I know what I see. And after a while, you started believing me. So if you would hang out with me, you would actually get from me how to see yourself. You could see in my eyes on you a mirror in which you could begin to find, could it be? Is that possible? Is it true? Am I who Barry thinks I am? But the first thing is do you have someone in your life that sees you, that sees it? And then the second is, will you believe them? And then the third is, are there tools? Is there a path where we can actualize and actually become capable of stepping into that, so that we, our behavior, our choices, some of our begins to align with the truth of that image. But everybody I work with, I always know they hold an image of themselves. And the first place you start is with the image being held. I mean, we've talked about this some, right? But most leadership coaches will start with behavior. And it's tied to behavior, but you will break a behavioral promise you make to yourself because the behavior you're trying to drive yourself to do, that willpower of that early kid, it doesn't go deep enough. You'll break the behavior you know you should do because you don't see yourself as a person that's able to do it. Your image is not aligned with your behavior. So it doesn't matter if you change your image. I mean, your behavior, until you get the image right, the behavior is always a cover.
Right.
So if that's not saying too much too fast, we've got to be able to work down to that sage sees in you.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that in you seeing me, right, that's allowed me, kind of gave me permission to reformat my image of myself.
Thank you.
And it took some time, I remember.
Thanks.
And in that, right, we were, to tie it in here, we were reformatting the being and being less focused at that time on
doing.
And then once you can get the being right, then you can look at, okay, now what are we doing with it?
There's a lot of people out there trying to do enough, do more, double down on doing, and the issue is in the being. The issue is in the image.
Yeah.
And strong cultures, strong teams, strong individuals are strong because they've built themselves from the image up, and they're not behaving in a false way. They're behaving in a way aligned with their image. And that's kind of high talk, but there's a way to get into it to make that more explainable. But until we get down to the image, and that's why I love, the sage has to duck his head while the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. There's probably someone in most people's lives that has at one point or another dropped keys around your feet. Maybe a grandparent, a third grade teacher, maybe a coach. Somebody saw you, and maybe you weren't ready to be seen. Maybe it wasn't safe to come out and believe that. So some of these keys have been, I think, laid at our feet. If you go back and look in your story, the people that didn't flatter you, but actually saw you, were early indications that there would be a day you'll believe them and you'll pick up a key and you'll come a little bit out of that cage. That's transformation on its way. But it's image, identity, true self, image, divine spark. It's called different ways through the perennial wisdom of human history. Mm-hmm. But there's no leader that has stood the test of time that wasn't operating from a very deep sense of conviction at the level of image.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's been a lot of bad leaders who have taken power and they didn't know who they were, and they were trying to use their power to fill the hole of who they were. And it doesn't turn out good. And you and I can go through history and start sorting major leaders one way or the other. But Mandela, Gandhi, you mentioned, Mother Teresa, St. Francis, Jesus, Buddha, Hafez, all those people, if you read their works, they're going to talk to you about the center point of image, identity is where you begin the formation. The West has gutted it.
Yes.
And our leaderships now are, we see the outcome of that. So we can go back and catch it. It's not mystery. There's mystery in it, but it's not mystery. You can know who you are deep down, and you can believe it, and it can be yours. So
I think that's actually like a beautiful spot to kind of cap it for now.
It's fun to think about it all the way down. Thanks for going there.
There's so much rich content in there, Barry. Like we blew through an hour super easy. I appreciate you being willing to do this. I had a feeling.
You too.
Just opening the door on this conversation, opening it up to people beyond just you and I, like I had a feeling like that would just be powerful content regardless. And I wanted to share that with people.
Thank you. Thanks a bunch for leading us to it.
4.5 years together, and we're still getting them. And so it's just
it's
get this much kind of beauty in just one sitting, and it.
Thank you.
The overall is that got to be before you do, and like in order to be, you got to get to work on that image.
And look for the sages in your life, and maybe a metaphor is stay with the poem. Look for the keys that have been dropped in your story, and don't be afraid of them. Recognize them again. Re-see some of the early ways that you were given a glimpse of yourself, and look again. Before we got all educated and categorized. Look earlier than all of that. And I think there's probably people in our lives that have visited us as a sage. We can talk more about that. That'd be a very interesting conversation for people to go, look, I don't think that's ever happened to me. And I'm sitting here throwing the gauntlet down saying, no, but we've got to talk about that. Fair enough.
Story that no one did it. And then just sitting here thinking, I'm already starting to be like, oh, I remember this moment. And actually what it made me think of is that we've, especially kind of the way we've come to live our lives nowadays, like it's not really even just one cage. It's just like cages inside of cages inside.
So true, man. It's true. Like those little China dolls or Russian dolls. Yeah.
I've been freed of many of them just to find I'm in a larger cage. And so,
that's what you did. That's what you said so well when we were talking was like, well, to solve that, like those little Russian dolls, that are
right.
To solve that, we think it's getting a bigger one.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You with me? It's not. It's about actually, like you were saying earlier in the conversation, how do you let go? And it's actually coming back in to what's very real image.
Right.
Holding that as precious and quit trying to scale it onto a title or an org chart. And now I really am important. Look, I'm a leader because it says it.
Right.
And we're like, really?
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. So you leading most of your meetings because you're leading the meetings because you have the highest title? Because I assure you, that's not who's leading the meeting always. The person that has real leadership is not the one always with title. And bingo. That's kind of hard sometimes when leaders realize they're wrestling with power because other people actually know how to lead meetings or have the persuasion of the group behind them, but the title person is saying, I want it done this way. And there's discongruence, and it's like the leader doesn't get it. So they're supposed to have the power. And it's like, no, actually, it moved around the room 3 times in one meeting, and you didn't see it. Like, you don't know how to empower other people, but she was leading for that 15 minutes. She did what the meeting needed, and people were responding. And then you stepped on her toes because you weren't getting your agenda done. So you squished the leader in order to go back to where you thought the meeting had to go. And you're losing your team, but you're not aware.
Man, that's huge.
I know. And it's like, wow, okay. But, that's where we're saying, that's where the work is. So, hey, I didn't tell you, I know we're off. I got this from my grandfather, and I didn't know this until I went through a box. I'm 63 now, and I went through a box this last year of keepsakes. And I didn't know I had this in my keepsake. I've never seen this before in my life. I just saw it. And it's from, my last name's Brown, and the title on it, it has letterhead, and it says Brown's Grocery and Market. And it's a letter from my grandfather, and he actually dates it. He writes it in pencil, and it's in cursive writing. It's 1 page. And he dates it. And then he says, Dear Barry. Well, by date, I am 3 years old.
Wow.
He writes me 3 paragraphs. The last paragraph, I would like for you to come and fish with me, and you can see my boat, what Grandma and me made. Grandma is a fisherman too. Come see me. I will close and mail this. Bless you, Papa.
Wow.
Now, like, come on, 63 years old, that's nothing to, get moved on. No, because the image I held of myself was when my dad died, the family abandoned us for the most part. And I was just shuttled out to be the man of the house. actually the grandfather, the sage, dropped the set of keys at my feet in that letter. And he said, "You're worth being with. Come see me. I'd like to fish with you. I see you. I have room for you in my world. I'm handwriting a letter just to you. I'm mailing it now to you." Well, I read that 60 years later for the first time, and I hear sage, right? And there's something now, doesn't like all of a sudden make everything perfect, but it informs me at a very deep level of an image that someone saw in me early on. And I went, there it is. Okay. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, for me, and that's what a key looks like. That's why I want to read it.
I was just going to say, it just goes to show, like, if you're a sage, the importance of dropping keys can't be understated. And
Right on.
it looks like somebody didn't pick it up. Like, they might be picking that key up long after you're gone.
Rowdy, beautiful prisoners.
Right.
We'll set ourselves free when we're ready. And I think in some ways, and I think that's when, I was ready to I probably could have read that in my 40s. And well, I would have always liked it because of my grandfather. I would have been like, what? But now at this season of my life, I can see the key in that thing. Right. So it's kind of cool. Well, it's good to be with you, man. I know we went as long as we should, but we always enjoy our time together. So thanks, Damien.
I appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations every day. And I appreciate just the opportunity. I appreciate what we are out here trying to do out in the world, and appreciate
together. Well, next Friday, 3:30.
That's right. And I don't know what we're going to talk about, and I don't know what the format's going to be, and I don't know how it's going to go, but so far so good. So we'll see.
I'm showing up for it. So thanks.
All right. I appreciate it, Barry. Have a
great evening.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So that was another conversation. And again, thank you for joining us, because the contributions each of us made and built on gave us not only something to value in the moment, but now we walk out into the world. So the purpose of Be Do Labs is not just to grab time from you, but to actually give your time more purpose in the next step you take in your life. So embody it, practice it, and come back for more. Thanks for being part of our community.